a sweet treat with a deadly surprise inside. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing this community grow. Hearing from you always makes these mysteries come alive. Let's begin. If there's one thing Nero Wolfe hates more than interruptions, it's cheerfulness before lunch. So when a woman with a frosting smile and a pink pastry box landed in our office at 11:15, I braced for a thunderstorm. She had the look of someone who'd never had to wait for an elevator, mid-30s, sharp suit, the kind of perfume that didn't so much enter a room as negotiate with it. The pink box she carried was tied with a white ribbon and, I'll admit, smelled good enough to make Fritz whistle in the kitchen. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, standing like she owned the carpet. "My name is Clarissa Vale. I own Vale's Cupcakes and Company." I introduced her, knowing full well Wolfe wouldn't extend the same courtesy. He didn't. He was in his chair, of course. Orchid schedule over, lips pressed together in that special way that said you have until the butter starts to melt. "What do you want, madam?" Wolfe asked, eyes on the box as if it contained a ticking bomb made of sugar. "It's not what I want," she said. "It's what I need. Someone's trying to ruin me, and they're doing it through my cupcakes." That got me. I've heard a lot of openings in that room, but through my cupcakes was a first. Wolfe sighed. "Miss or Mrs. Vale, I do not investigate confectionery calamities." She smiled, the kind that means a person knows you'll come around eventually. "You might want to reconsider. The sabotage isn't culinary, it's financial and personal. My partner's dead, my recipes are missing, and my brand's being blackmailed. Someone's selling our signature cupcakes to our biggest rival, under our own name." I could almost see Wolfe's eyelids flutter. Sabotage, theft, betrayal, the sort of words that dripped with human mischief, even if the medium was sugar and flour. "And," she added, lowering her voice, "I believe the person behind it has already been in this house." That did it. Wolfe straightened a fraction. Not much, but for him, it was the equivalent of jumping up and shouting, "Eureka!" I asked the obvious. "You mean in this brownstone?" She nodded. 2 weeks ago, delivering cupcakes for your chef, Mr. Brenner." "Fritz?" I corrected. "Yes. He said they were a treat for your private dinner. One of those new velvet rum cupcakes. Except the recipe wasn't mine. It was the one that was stolen." Wolfe's lips compressed. "Fritz," he called, voice deep and slow. Fritz appeared from the hall like a cat who's heard the can opener but expects bad news. "Yes, sir. Did you procure cupcakes from Miss Vale recently?" Fritz hesitated. "Yes, sir. A young man delivered them. Said they were a gift from the bakery to thank me for featuring their mousse in my correspondence with Cuisine Moderne." "Describe him." Fritz frowned. "Tall, red hair, polite. He wore their logo apron." Clarissa's tone turned crisp. "That's impossible. We don't have a red-haired deliveryman. Never did." Silence settled in like fog. Wolfe leaned back, his fingers forming the roof he reserves for thoughts worth keeping. "Archie," he said finally, "see Miss Vale to the door. Accept no more deliveries of confections from unknown men." Clarissa looked insulted. "You're refusing the case?" Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "I'm not refusing. I'm digesting. The matter appears unpalatable, but not indigestible. Return tomorrow at 11. Bring me a list of your employees, past and present, and the particulars of your partner's demise." She blinked, caught off guard, but satisfied. "You'll take it then?" "I will consider it," Wolfe said, "if my digestion allows." When she left, I turned to him. "A cupcake caper? That's your new field of justice?" Wolfe looked at me with something almost like hunger. "Archie, any man who tampers with another's recipe tampers with his soul, and," he added, "no one trespasses in my kitchen." Fritz was rattled. You wouldn't notice it if you didn't live with the man, but I'd seen him face a flaming skillet with more composure than he had after Clarissa Vale's visit. He hovered at the kitchen threshold, polishing the same mixing bowl like it might confess under pressure. Wolfe had retreated to his chair again, that monument of stubborn upholstery, eyes closed, fingertips steepled. The silence in the office had texture, like something thick enough to cut with a butter knife. "She's gone," I said after a minute. "And Fritz looks like he just discovered the mayonnaise was plotting against him. You're not really taking this cupcake thing seriously, are you?" Wolfe didn't open his eyes. The young woman stated that one of her confections, of uncertain authorship, entered my home under false pretense. That, Archie, is an invasion. Of all the sanctuaries in this city, this brownstone must remain inviolate. "Sure," I said, "but a fake cupcake recipe doesn't rank high on the Richter scale of crime." That earned me a slow lift of one eyelid. "You are conflating scale with consequence. Sabotage in commerce, theft of intellectual property, and a false pretext of entry, all intertwined. Such a melange rarely ends with mere frosting." "Okay," I said, "let's assume there's something rotten in the state of buttercream. You're sending me out tomorrow to get that list of employees, right?" "You will retrieve it," Wolfe said, "and you will observe Miss Vale. She presents an aspect of control, a woman used to command, but beneath she is agitated. Observe what disturbs her equilibrium." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Wolfe murmured. "She fears something more than exposure." That was enough philosophy for one morning. I went to the kitchen. Fritz had finally put the bowl down and was staring at a small, empty white box on the counter. "This is it," he said when I asked. "The one the man brought. I saved it because the texture of the paper was unusual. Thick, too stiff for ordinary packaging." I picked it up. It was indeed heavier than you'd expect for a cupcake container. Inside, there was nothing but a few crumbs and a faint trace of something that smelled like nutmeg. And maybe something else. Something faintly metallic. "You sure you didn't notice anything off about the cupcake itself?" I asked. "I didn't eat it," Fritz said, affronted. It was for Mr. Wolfe's private dinner, but he declined to sample it after I described the delivery. He said he would not consume food whose provenance was uncertain. "Smart man," I muttered, putting the lid back on. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I glanced at Fritz. He lifted his eyebrows toward the front. It was just past noon, too early for the mail, too late for the milkman. I went to the door. Standing there was a man who could have been a department store mannequin if they'd started making those in used car salesmen. Mid-40s, sandy hair, smile polished to a shine. "Goodwin?" he asked. "Archie Goodwin." "That's what the nameplate says. What's your flavor?" "Ronald Hatch. I represent the Vale Cupcake Company, or what's left of it." He shifted slightly, looking past me like he wanted a glimpse of Wolfe's orchids. "May I come in? I think I can save you some time." He said it like he knew I'd say yes. I didn't, but I opened the door enough for him to take it as permission. He stepped in, gave the place a once-over, and smiled like he approved of the decor. "I was Clarissa Vale's business partner," he said, "until 2 months ago, before she accused me of stealing her recipes and ruining her life. You have a charming way of introducing yourself." "Truth is charming," he said easily, "and profitable." I led him into the office, where Wolfe was still doing his best impersonation of Mount Rushmore. Hatch stopped when he saw him. "So this is the man himself." Wolfe didn't move. "I am Nero Wolfe," he said. "You are uninvited." "That's true," Hatch said, "but you'll want to hear what I have to say. I came to save you from wasting your client's money." "Her money is not yet mine," Wolfe said. "Proceed." Hatch smiled thinly. "Clarissa is unstable. Her partner, yes, deceased, was her fiancé. He died of a heart attack 3 months ago, right after we finalized a deal with Confection Works, a large-scale distributor. Clarissa claims I forced him into the contract. She's been unraveling ever since, accusing me, accusing her staff, and now dragging private detectives into it. You're being played. Wolfe's brows arched slightly. And you, sir, are providing this courtesy out of moral philanthropy. Self-interest, Hatch said without blinking. If she's going to drag my name through the mud, I'd rather be ahead of the smear. And I'll tell you one thing, she's not wrong about sabotage. Someone's targeting her business. I just doubt it's me. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, thick and unsealed. Copies of her business correspondence. You'll find she's been receiving anonymous letters, ransom style, offering to return her lost recipes for a price. If you want to know who's behind that, start with her new manager, Carla Raines. She joined right after my exit. Too smooth by half. He put the envelope on Wolfe's desk. Take it, Hatch said. Free of charge. Just don't say I didn't warn you. He left without waiting for a reply, which I had to admit was impressive. Not many people managed to leave Wolfe's office without being dismissed or destroyed. I turned back to Wolfe. Well, that was a refreshing visit from the land of self-interest. Do we trust him? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He opened the envelope, glanced at the first letter, and grunted. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, block print. Observe, Archie. The letter's phrasing, "Return what you took before more," is taken from you. It implies familiarity, personal animus. He looked at the next. Your frosting hides a bitter core. Crude metaphor, but the pattern suggests persistence. No mere prank. Could still be Hatch, I said. The guy looks like he writes anonymous letters as a hobby. Possibly, but you will not assume. You will see Miss Vale tomorrow at her establishment. Obtain from her not only the list I requested, but the originals of these letters if she has them. Note her reactions when you mention Hatch. Got it, I said. Anything else? Yes, Wolfe said. Have Fritz destroy the remaining cupcake box after you photograph it. I will not have another trace of confectionery espionage in this house. That was Wolfe's version of declaring war. The next morning, I set out for Vale's Cupcakes and Company, located in a part of town that smelled like ambition baked at 350 degrees. The storefront was as pink as Clarissa's lipstick, the glass immaculate, the counter lined with sugar like a display of jewels. Behind it stood Clarissa herself, not smiling this time. She looked tired, as though she'd spent the night thinking and not sleeping. When she saw me, she motioned me into a back office filled with files, mixing schedules and a lingering aroma of cinnamon and stress. You saw him, didn't you? She said before I could speak. Hatch? Yeah. He dropped by, uninvited. Left a little reading material. Her mouth tightened. I should have warned you. He'll do anything to cover himself. He's charming when he needs to be. That's his weapon. I've seen sharper, I said. He mentioned anonymous letters. Mind if I see the originals? She hesitated, then opened a drawer and handed me a folder. Inside were 3 letters, all typed on cheap paper, no signatures, no return addresses. But one had a faint smudge, pink like frosting. Notice that? I asked. I did, she said. The first one came the day after my partner died. The second, 2 weeks later. The last, 3 days ago. I nodded, reading the lines again. Each one was short, menacing, personal. Did you show these to the police? She shook her head. No, I don't want publicity. Cupcakes and scandal don't mix well. Tell that to your PR manager. She gave a weary smile. That would be Carla. And you're right, she'd probably find a way to make it trending. I filed that name away for later. Miss Vale, I said, do you mind if I talk to your staff? Carla included. Not at all, just be careful. Not everyone here is as sweet as they look. I stepped out into the bakery floor again, notebook ready. Somewhere between the frosting, the fear, and the faint metallic scent that still clung to the cupcake box. Something was starting to curdle, and I had the feeling Wolfe's digestion was about to be tested again. The staff at Vale's Cupcakes and Company looked like they belonged in a poster for the industrious American dream. Smiles at the ready, aprons spotless, hands moving with rhythm and precision. But behind every pair of eyes was something else. Curiosity, suspicion, maybe fear. I've been around long enough to know when people aren't just decorating pastries, they're protecting secrets. Clarissa had gone back to her office, leaving me to wander with the casual authority of a man who looked like he belonged and didn't care if he didn't. The first person who met my gaze was a girl with hair the color of dark caramel, wiping down a counter. Her badge read Gina in block letters that had seen better days. "You must be the detective," she said, a mix of awe and nerves. "I must be," I replied. "You work here long?" 8 months. I handle front counter and special orders. Miss Vale told us someone's been copying our recipes. If you ask me, it's corporate espionage. The rival store, Sugar Well, opened across the street last month. Their velvet rum cupcakes taste just like ours. "Maybe coincidence," I said. Gina snorted. "Coincidence doesn't use the same vanilla blend." I had to admit, I liked her confidence. "You ever see anyone hanging around, taking photos? Deliveries gone strange?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "There was one thing. About 2 weeks ago, we got an order from someone named J. Peters. 6 velvet rum cupcakes, paid cash, no pickup. The next morning, the box was gone from the cooler. I thought maybe Clarissa gave it away, but she said she didn't touch it." "J. Peters," I repeated. "Know anyone by that name?" She shook her head. "No, but Carla signed off on the invoice." Carla Raines. The name Hatch had emphasized, the one Clarissa hadn't defended. I thanked Gina and followed the scent of trouble, vanilla with a hint of deceit, to the office at the back labeled Operations. The door was open, and behind a desk sat a woman with sleek black hair and posture that could slice marble. She looked up, her expression practiced, charming but calculating. "You must be Mr. Goodwin," she said, smiling with her lips, not her eyes. "Clarissa mentioned you'd be sniffing around." "I like to call it investigating," I said. "Sniffing's for amateurs and bloodhounds." She laughed politely, the kind of laugh that doesn't believe in laughter. "So, what can I do for you?" "I'm curious about the anonymous letters Miss Vale's received, and the missing recipes. Maybe you can help me connect some dots." Carla leaned back, crossing her legs with precision. "Ah, yes, the letters. I've seen them. Pathetic attempts at intimidation. She keeps them locked in her desk like war trophies. Between you and me, Clarissa loves drama. The poor woman can't resist a stage." "You work closely with her?" "I run the operations," she said. "Scheduling, supply, distribution. I joined after her fiancé's death. She was a wreck, could barely manage payroll. Someone had to keep the ovens running." She mentioned Hatch. "You know him?" Carla smiled again, a shade cooler. "Know him? Let's just say I've seen the type. Smooth talker, full of promises. He made this place look profitable on paper while bleeding it dry in practice. Clarissa adored him, worshipped him, really. When he left, she needed someone capable. That's me. You don't sound fond of her." "I'm practical," she said, tapping a file folder on her desk. "She's emotional. I keep things functioning." "Like ordering cupcakes under fake names?" I asked. Her hand froze. Just for half a second, but that was enough. Then she smiled again, slower this time. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my notebook. "An order signed off by you. J. Peters. Never picked up. Vanished overnight." She shrugged, recovering fast. "We get hundreds of orders, Mr. Goodwin. Some fall through. Probably a clerical mistake." "Probably," I said, tucking the notebook away. "Mind if I see the invoice?" "It's archived," she said smoothly. I'll have someone find it for you later. Do that, I said, turning to go. And one more thing, what kind of ink do you use for your printer? Her brow furrowed. Standard. Why? Just curious, I said, and left before she could think of an answer. I'd seen enough to report back. There was tension between the frosting layers here, and it wasn't about sugar ratios. Carla was the efficient serpent in the garden, Clarissa the wounded Eve. Hatch, well, he was the exiled Adam trying to burn down Eden on his way out. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was where I left him, as immovable as the furniture. Fritz was hovering again, clearly hoping for updates that didn't involve criminal trespass in his pantry. Well, Wolfe asked when I came in. 3 suspects and counting, I said, dropping into my chair. Clarissa's nervous but sincere. Carla Raines is slick and too quick to call her boss unstable. Hatch is still polishing his halo. Oh, and someone named J. Peters ordered cupcakes that disappeared before pickup. Wolfe's eyes flicked open. The name is fictitious. Most likely. Describe Carla Raines. Efficient, ambitious, likes control. Thinks of Clarissa as a liability. Knows too much about the financials. Wolfe grunted. A potential usurper. That's my read. Did she display curiosity about your inquiry? She tried to hide it, badly. He leaned back. Archie, we are surrounded by appetites. One for profit, one for vindication, and one for control. The deceased fiancé. What do we know of his death? Heart attack, according to Clarissa. Sudden. No autopsy requested. Convenient, Wolfe murmured. Have Saul Panzer obtain a copy of the death certificate and related reports. I wish to know the attending physician's name. Planning to exhume him, I asked. Don't be fatuous. I merely wish to understand whether his heart failed him or was helped to fail. Cupcake poisoning? Not impossible, Wolfe said calmly. A creative saboteur often tests small before striking large. Clarissa's recipes could provide both means and motive. I made the call to Saul, giving him the details, and hung up. Wolfe was studying the anonymous letters again, his lips tightening slightly. This paper, he said, is cheap but not common. Acidic stock, used in office printers of small businesses to save cost. The pink residue you mentioned, describe it. Like frosting but dry. Could have been food coloring. He nodded once. Bring me a sample tomorrow, and Archie, visit Sugarwell. The rival bakery? Yes, discreetly. Determine whether their velvet rum cupcakes are indeed duplicates of Miss Vale's. Taste, smell, texture. Use your senses, if not your discretion. That's the first time you've ever ordered me to eat dessert for work, I said. I'm not ordering indulgence, he replied. I am verifying theft. So the next day, I found myself at Sugarwell, which looked like Vale's shop after a corporate makeover. The staff wore matching hats, the music was cheerful, and everything smelled faintly of success. I ordered 1 velvet rum cupcake and took a bite. It was good. Too good. Same dense crumb, same faint nutmeg undertone, same velvety aftertaste of rum essence. If I'd closed my eyes, I couldn't have told it apart from the sample Fritz had described. Except there was something else. A faint, metallic edge beneath the sweetness, like someone had stirred the batter with a coin. When I left, I pocketed the wrapper and napkin. The cashier, a young guy with red hair, gave me a polite nod on the way out. Red hair. 2 weeks ago, Fritz had described a red-haired delivery man who'd brought the gift cupcakes. I took one more glance back through the window. The same man was now talking to someone behind the counter, a woman with her back turned, sleek black hair twisted up in a neat bun. Carla Raines. So much for coincidence. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in mid-discussion with Saul, who dropped by with papers in hand. Saul gave me a nod, then passed Wolfe the folder. Heart attack, Saul said. Official cause of death. But the coroner's note says there was mild trace of ethanol in a compound used in rum flavoring. Not lethal in ordinary amounts, but enough to interact with certain heart medications. Rum flavoring, Wolfe repeated. Velvet rum. The silence that followed was thick enough to spread with a knife. Wolfe leaned forward, eyes half-lidded. Archie, he said, we have been following the scent of sugar. It seems we must now follow the taste of poison. And for the first time since the case began, the brownstone felt colder. The metallic taste from the rival cupcake still lingered on my tongue when I stepped back into the brownstone that evening. Fritz was setting the table with the delicate choreography of a man preparing a ritual rather than dinner, and Wolfe was already in his chair, surrounded by the low glow of lamplight and the weight of thought. Saul had gone, leaving behind the report, a faint smell of rain on his coat, and the kind of silence that stretches when Wolfe is assembling the scaffolding of a conclusion. He didn't look up when I came in. You tasted it. Every bite, I said. Velvet rum cupcake from Sugar Well. Same as Vale's, down to the nutmeg. But there's something off. Metallic undertone, faint but there. Like licking a spoon that forgot it was silver. That would be ethyl maltol reacting with trace metal residue, Wolfe said absently. A flavor compound used in imitation rum essence. The authentic version would not produce such a tang. Meaning the rival's using a cheap knockoff, I said. Meaning, Wolfe corrected. The formula was copied imperfectly. Theft, not coincidence. The question is whether the thief is careless or desperate. Careless enough to kill a man? I asked. He looked up then, slow and heavy. Desperation makes artisans of murderers, Archie. Tell me again. The red-haired man. Cashier at Sugar Well. Matches Fritz's description of the delivery guy who brought the cupcakes here. Courteous, quiet, maybe late 20s. Red hair, pale eyes. Didn't volunteer a word, but he watched me the whole time I was in the shop. Ah, Wolfe murmured, half to himself. Observation. An underappreciated vice. I'll get his name tomorrow, I said. If he's our go-between, he's the thread tying both bakeries together. Do that. But not tomorrow. Tonight. That got my attention. You're sending me out again? You're not worried I'll miss dinner? I'm always worried you will miss dinner, Wolfe said dryly. But I am more concerned with the preservation of evidence. If this man senses pursuit, he may vanish. The red hair is distinctive. Find him before he finds reason to dye it. I grabbed my coat. You sure you don't want me to drag along Saul? He's got a better poker face. You have the advantage of charm, Wolfe said, and a face less suited to menace. Use both judiciously. I was halfway out the door when he added, Archie, avoid pastries. So around 9 that night I was parked across the street from Sugar Well, the neon sign buzzing like a lazy hornet. Through the window the redhead was closing up, wiping counters, counting cash, the whole end-of-day drill. The manager, a plump man with glasses, gave him a pat on the shoulder before leaving. A few minutes later, the redhead locked the front, pocketed the keys, and started down the street. I followed. He walked with the rhythm of someone who had nothing to hide but kept an eye on reflections anyway. After a few blocks, he turned into an alley beside a print shop, unlocked a side door, and slipped inside. The sign above the shop read, Lux Printing Co. I waited a minute, then went up to the door. Locked. No lights inside, except a faint one deeper in. I circled around to the back, where a window glowed weakly through paper blinds. A figure moved inside. Him, same red hair, now in a white undershirt, sitting at a desk with stacks of paper and what looked like a laser printer. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw the shape of his hands moving carefully, cutting paper, aligning envelopes. Envelopes. I got closer. On the desk, he was assembling letters, typed, block printed, folded into plain white envelopes identical to the ones Clarissa had received. I could make out fragments of words on one half-typed page. Return what you took. That was enough confirmation to raise my pulse and Wolfe's eyebrows when I brought the report back an hour later. He's our letterman, I said, moonlighting as a pastry clerk, but the side hustle's extortion. Indeed, Wolfe said. And yet you didn't bring him back trust for inspection. I thought about it, I said. But I figured you'd prefer him free long enough to incriminate himself properly. Your intuition, while immodest, is correct. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. He is a tool, Archie. A courier, not a creator. The phrasing of those letters was deliberate, the language intimate. This man writes for money, not malice. Someone dictates. Carla, I said. Possibly. She has motive and access, but let us not neglect Miss Vale herself. Clarissa, she's the one being blackmailed. Wolfe's tone was mild. So she says. But money is a persuasive language. Suppose she staged the theft, sold her own recipes through intermediaries to raise capital, then regretted the consequences. A convenient villain like Hatch absorbs the suspicion, the perfect pastry shell for deceit. Except she came to you, I said. Indeed, he replied. And she came with performance. People who stage their own calamities often need an audience. I wish to see her again. Tomorrow at 11. The next morning, Clarissa arrived precisely at 11, wearing navy instead of pink and an expression carved from fatigue. Fritz brought coffee, but she didn't touch it. Wolfe remained silent until the air grew tight. Miss Vale, he began finally. You neglected to tell me your late fiancé's name was Gregory Hatch. Her head snapped up, and for the first time, genuine shock replaced her composure. How did you? Mr. Hatch spoke of a partner, not specifying romantic involvement. The coroner's report provided the name. You did not correct the omission. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't relevant. On the contrary, Wolfe said. Relevance is measured by omission. Your silence is an act of selection. She looked trapped but defiant. Gregory's death was an accident. He had a heart condition. I didn't think it mattered. It matters, Wolfe said softly, because his heart failed under the influence of rum flavoring. The same used in your recipe, the same found in the cupcake sent here. Someone is reconstructing that formula for more than commercial gain. She went pale. You think someone murdered him? I think, Wolfe said, that your business is the residue of a crime and your kitchen its an alibi. Who benefited from his death? Tears welled in her eyes, but she kept her chin up. I did. Legally. The company was insured. Ah, Wolfe murmured. And who advised you through the insurance claim? Carla, she said quietly. She handled everything after he died. Of course, Wolfe said. Archie, you will invite Miss Raines here tomorrow at 5. Do not inform her of our findings. Tell her it concerns new evidence in Hatch's blackmail case, and inform Mr. Hatch himself that I require his presence as well. Let them both stew in proximity. Clarissa looked confused, frightened but relieved to have direction. I saw her out and returned to find Wolfe staring at the ceiling like a man reading invisible script. You think Carla killed him? I said. I think, Wolfe said. She administered the imitation flavoring in a quantity she understood would interact with his medication. She then assumed control, claiming loyalty and competence while bleeding the company through the rival bakery. She is clever, but not patient. Tomorrow will prove it. He closed his eyes, signaling the end of conversation. I left him to his orchids and went to prep for the next day's ambush. At 5 sharp the following evening, Carla arrived first, punctual as guilt. Hatch followed 15 minutes later, annoyed to be sharing air with her. Clarissa came last, visibly tense. Wolfe greeted no one. He sat motionless, letting silence do what speech could not, turn nerves to confession. "Miss Raines," Wolfe said at last, "I've learned that you and Mr. Hatch have had recent correspondence regarding the transfer of intellectual property. Recipes, to be precise." "That's absurd," she snapped. "He's been trying to sabotage me since the day I took over." "Then you deny ever contacting Sugarwell Bakery?" "Of course." "Then how," Wolfe said, "do you explain your subordinate, the red-haired man, who doubles as a typesetter for Lux Printing, assembling anonymous letters on your stationery?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Hatch chuckled darkly. "I knew it." "Be quiet," Wolfe said, his tone like a trap springing shut. "You, Mr. Hatch, are hardly innocent. You attempted to sell the same stolen formulas under a rival's name, hoping to profit while framing Miss Vale, but you lacked the cunning to create the correspondence yourself. Miss Raines supplied that talent. She also supplied the flavoring that killed your brother." "Brother?" I echoed. Wolfe nodded slightly. "Half-brother. Same father. Different fortunes. A bond concealed by vanity. You both resented each other enough to destroy the third party who stood between you, Miss Vale." Carla rose abruptly, her mask cracking. "You can't prove any of this." "Proof," Wolfe said, "is already on its way. The police are retrieving the typewriter ribbons from Lux Printing. They contain your drafts, each one addressed in your hand, each one signed with your crime." She went still, the fight draining out of her like air from a punctured pastry bag. Hatch swore under his breath, but his face told me he knew the game was finished. Wolfe exhaled, leaned back, and closed his eyes. "Archie, call Inspector Kramer." By the time the sirens faded and the brownstone was quiet again, the smell of Fritz's lamb stew had taken the edge off the day. Wolfe lifted his glass, savoring a slow sip of Burgundy. "I confess, Archie," he said at last, "I find the human appetite infinitely diverting. They sweeten their sins and call them ambition, yet even the most exquisite frosting cannot disguise the taste of guilt." "Yeah," I said. "And some cupcakes kill more than diets." He almost smiled. "Pfui. Bring me the cheese." Dinner that night should have been the peaceful finale to the whole confectionery circus, but the calm didn't sit right. Wolfe had eaten with his usual discipline, savoring every bite, but even his fork seemed slower than usual. The lamb was tender, the burgundy precise, the world restored to order, except for one small, quiet itch that wouldn't leave me alone. Maybe it was the way Carla Raines had folded so fast. People like her don't usually collapse in one act. Or maybe it was the look Clarissa gave Wolfe just before she left, half gratitude, half something sharper. A flicker of guilt that didn't belong in a woman newly vindicated. I didn't like it. And when Wolfe doesn't like something, he turns to orchids. When I don't like something, I turn to streets. Fritz had just cleared the dishes when Wolfe pushed his chair back and gave me the kind of glance that meant he'd been thinking the same thing all along. "Archie," he said, "Miss Vale's expression at departure. You noticed?" "I did," I said. "Like a cat who ate the canary and blamed the feathers on the dog." "Vivid, if inelegant," he said. Her relief was too absolute. She no longer feared the consequence of exposure because she believes there is none. That is unnatural. Maybe she was just grateful the case wrapped neatly. "Neatness," Wolfe said, "is an illusion rarely granted by life or pastry. Something remains beneath the icing." That was all the prompting I needed. I grabbed my coat again. "You want me to poke around?" "Discreetly," he said. "Revisit Miss Vale's establishment tomorrow morning. See what remains of her operations and whether her demeanor has shifted from victim to victor. Pay attention to her financial transactions, particularly her insurance settlement." I nodded. "You're thinking she might have baked her troubles and eaten them too?" "Precisely," he said. "Bring me facts. We will season them with truth later." The next morning, the city had that washed-out look of early spring, rain threatening but not yet committed. Vale's Cupcakes and Company was open again, as though murder and betrayal were just ingredients you sift out of the batter. Clarissa was there behind the counter, poised and bright, her smile polished back into place. "Mr. Goodwin," she said warmly, almost too warmly. "I heard everything was resolved. Thank you for your help. I can finally breathe again." "Glad to hear it," I said, glancing around. "Looks like business is bouncing back." "Better than ever," she said, eyes glittering. "Word got around, and people love a scandal they can eat. We sold out of velvet rums by noon yesterday. Even with the flavoring that nearly killed your partner." Her smile faltered for a fraction. "We changed suppliers." I leaned on the counter. "And you're still the sole owner now that Carla's out of the picture?" "Yes. The company's entirely mine." "Insurance cleared already?" She stiffened. "Not yet." "Why?" "Just routine follow-up," I said. "Wolfe likes his paperwork tidy." She relaxed a little, but her hands were restless, straightening a napkin, tapping the counter. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I'm deeply grateful for his brilliance, and you, for your legwork." I gave her one of my best smiles, the kind that makes people talk more than they plan to. We like grateful clients. They're rare. When I stepped out, I didn't go far. Across the street, the window of a small cafe offered a clear view of her shop. I ordered black coffee and watched. A few minutes later, a man in a grey coat came in through the back door of a bakery. He didn't stay long, maybe 5 minutes, but when he left, Clarissa followed him out. They exchanged something, a slim envelope, and parted like professionals, not lovers. I followed the man 2 blocks before he ducked into a post office. Inside, he approached a clerk, handed over the same envelope, and signed a receipt. I waited until he was gone, then strolled in, flashed my license, and got a look at the outgoing mail log. The envelope was addressed to Eleanor Vale, Palm Beach, Florida. Relationship unknown, but the last name was enough. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had moved from his desk to his orchids, which meant his brain was busy but his body was at peace. I laid out what I'd seen. "She's mailing money," I said. "Likely cash or check. To a relative, Eleanor Vale, Palm Beach. Maybe a sister, maybe a mother." "Or an accomplice," Wolfe said. "You think she had help setting up the whole thing? Even Carla didn't suggest that." "Carla," Wolfe said with a touch of disdain, "was useful as a scapegoat, not a conspirator. Miss Vale manipulated both Hatch and Rains into predictable behaviors. A woman of her temperament requires a quieter partner, someone who remains unseen yet indispensable." "Like family," I said. He nodded. "Precisely. The Vale enterprise may be a family affair in more than name. The letters, the recipe theft, even the imitation flavoring, all components of a design to consolidate control. But designs leave traces. Saul will find out who receives that envelope." He rang for Fritz, handed him the card with Saul's number, and went back to inspecting his orchids like the fate of pastry empires depended on their bloom. That evening, Saul called. "The address in Palm Beach belongs to a P.O. box rented by Eleanor Vale, listed as consultant for Sunrise Flavoring Company. Registered in Delaware." Wolfe grunted. "A shell corporation." "Looks that way," Saul said. "They handle bulk flavoring shipments for small bakeries. Guess who their top New York client is?" "Vale's Cupcakes," I said. "Right on the first try," Saul confirmed. "Looks like Clarissa's been paying her own company, overcharging her own accounts, funneling money out through Florida. Carla might have found out, and that's what got her set up for the fall." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Excellent, Saul. That will suffice. Collect the documents if you can. I will summon Miss Vale once more." When Clarissa arrived the next morning, she wore confidence like perfume. She sat in the red leather chair, crossing her legs with the grace of a woman expecting flattery, not inquiry. "Mr. Wolfe," she said smoothly. I assumed our business was concluded. So did I, Wolfe said, until my assistant uncovered evidence that your business extends farther south than you admitted. Her face went pale beneath the rouge. I don't know what you mean. Of course you do, Wolfe said, voice heavy with finality. Sunrise Flavoring Company, Palm Beach, registered to Eleanor Vale, your cousin, through whom you laundered insurance proceeds by disguising them as ingredient purchases. You conspired to fake a sabotage narrative, eliminated competition through the deaths of both Hatch brothers, and used Miss Raines as an expendable intermediary. You thought the imitation flavoring would kill two birds, literally, and leave no one wiser. That's absurd, she burst out, but her voice cracked halfway through. Absurdity, Wolfe said, is the final refuge of the exposed. She stood abruptly, clutching her purse like a shield. You can't prove any of this. Not I, Wolfe said, but Inspector Kramer can. He's on his way. She froze, then glanced toward the door. It was a mistake. Archie was already there, leaning against it, arms crossed. Her shoulders dropped, the mask dissolved. Gregory wasn't supposed to die, she said quietly. He was supposed to sell the company, but he wouldn't let go. He thought I owed him forever. I just wanted what was mine. Wolfe sighed, almost pitying. Madame Ambition is an admirable condiment, but taken neat, it corrodes. Kramer arrived 10 minutes later, grouchy as ever but efficient. By the time they led Clarissa out, Fritz had started the coffee again. The air smelled of cinnamon and consequence. Wolfe sat back, folding his napkin as if closing a chapter. Archie, he said, I have never cared for sweetness. It dulls the senses. Yet I confess, deceit remains the richest flavor of all. Yeah, I said, pouring him coffee, especially when served with justice on the side. He raised an eyebrow. Pfui, justice is a garnish. And with that, the case of the killer in the cupcake was finished, though for days afterward, every time I passed a bakery window, I stuck to black coffee. Too much sugar, as Wolfe would say, spoils the palate, and sometimes the soul. The days after Clarissa Vale's arrest slid by with deceptive calm, like the surface of a lake that still hides the ripple beneath. For Wolfe, the matter was concluded. For me, not quite. The newspapers had had their feast, headlines dripping with scandal. Cupcake Queen's secret fortune, poison, pastry, and Palm Beach profits. Wolfe refused to read them naturally. He called it literary indigestion. But the thing about cases like this is that they don't fade as fast as ink. There's always something left, an aftertaste, like bitterness on the back of the tongue. I thought about it every time I passed the kitchen, where Fritz was back to his normal symphony of sizzling and chopping. No one mentioned cupcakes anymore. The mere word had become a profanity in the household. Yet it was more than that. Wolfe was quieter, not in the peaceful, satisfied way he usually is after tying a case in a perfect bow, but in the other way, the brooding, unsolved fragment kind of quiet. The kind that means his brain hasn't quite stopped turning. It was 3 nights after the arrest when it surfaced. I'd just finished filing the last of the case notes and was halfway through a beer when Wolfe called from the office. Archie. The tone told me this wasn't about missing coasters. I walked in. Something left out of the final recipe. He didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the row of orchids under the soft lamp, his hands clasped loosely over his stomach. Archie, do you recall my remark the evening of Miss Vale's arrest, that ambition, when undiluted, corrodes? Sure, I said. It was poetic enough to make the crime sound cultured. I've been reconsidering, he said. Clarissa Vale's ambition did not corrode. It calcified. It made her brittle, and brittle things break, but there's something incomplete about her collapse. You mean her confession? No, that was complete enough. What troubles me is its simplicity. She claimed her intent was never murder, only control. She blamed miscalculation for Gregory Hatch's death, yet she was a woman meticulous in all else. She would not have left death to chance. I sat down. You think she meant to kill him? Possibly not at first, but the sequence of events, her insurance policy, the Shell Corporation, the immediate expansion, these required premeditation. Too deliberate for panic, too elegant for mere greed. You're suggesting a third hand? He nodded slowly. Someone who guided her, perhaps even orchestrated both her success and her downfall. I leaned back. That's a nice, eerie thought. But who? Carla's gone, Hatch is in a cell, and the Florida cousin's being grilled by the feds. You're out of suspects. He closed his eyes for a moment. Am I? Fritz appeared in the doorway then, carrying a small tray with coffee. Mr. Wolfe, Inspector Kramer is here. Kramer, I said. At this hour? Wolfe grunted. He must be hungry. Kramer wasn't hungry. He was furious. He barged in with his usual cigar breath and a folder in hand. Wolfe, damn you, your case isn't finished. I smiled. You mean your case isn't finished? Wolfe's was done the moment you took the cuffs out. Kramer glared at me, then slapped the folder on Wolfe's desk. Clarissa Vale's dead. Poison. Cell T. That quiet that followed could have drowned a clock. Wolfe didn't move, but the air in the room thickened. She was in custody, Wolfe asked, voice even. Transferred to county lockup yesterday morning, Kramer said. This afternoon she got tea with lunch. No one else touched it. Doc says cyanide, instant, and before you start pontificating, no, it didn't come from her own stash. We checked everything. No source, no trace. Cyanide, Wolfe repeated softly, as if tasting it. A theatrical poison, unsubtle. Kramer jabbed a finger at him. Theatrics are your field, Wolfe. I'm just trying to keep the press off my back. You're the one who dug her up. Now she's dead, and the reporters are sniffing around about conspiracies. If there's another angle, you'd better give it to me fast. Wolfe's gaze had drifted somewhere far beyond the walls. When he finally spoke, his tone had cooled to steel. Inspector, you said the poison was administered through tea prepared by jail staff? Yeah. Routine. Boiled water. Standard issue. Then it was not administered in the cup, Wolfe said. It was introduced in the leaves. Kramer frowned. You think someone smuggled it in? I think, Wolfe said. Someone anticipated that Miss Vale would prefer control over humiliation. They sent her the means of ending both. Kramer groaned. You're telling me this was a mercy kill? Not mercy, Wolfe said. Containment. Whoever orchestrated this case understood that Miss Vale's arrest might lead to discovery of deeper ties, financial or otherwise. Her silence was worth more than her life. Hell, Kramer muttered. You're saying there's a bigger fish? Wolfe inclined his head. A financier, perhaps. Someone who used her bakery as a vessel for laundering more than insurance fraud. Her death is an act of accounting, not revenge. Kramer slammed the folder shut. You're guessing. Reasoning, Wolfe corrected. You will confirm it when you trace the ownership of the Sunrise Flavoring Company beyond its Delaware registration. It will lead not to Eleanor Vale, but to a holding trust, and that trust will bear the mark of someone who does not bake cupcakes. Kramer scowled. You've got a name. Not yet, but I will. He left in a flurry of curses and cigar smoke. I shut the door behind him and turned back to Wolfe. You really think this goes higher? Higher and deeper, Wolfe said. Miss Vale was intelligent but limited. Her ambition needed funding. A silent partner financed her expansion, demanded repayment through fraud, and withdrew the moment exposure threatened. The same partner who ensured her silence. And you're planning to dig? Archie, he said with that faint irritation that means he already knows I'll do it anyway. I do not dig. I infer. You will dig. The next day found me in the Manhattan offices of a corporate law firm that handled half the state's shady paper trails. Saul had passed me a lead, a registered agent who'd filed the Sunrise flavoring paperwork. The receptionist's smile was as sharp as her manicure. "Do you have an appointment?" "Always," I said. "It's just not on the books." 10 minutes later, I was face to face with a man who looked like he'd been born inside a tax shelter. Gray suit, pale face, calm eyes. Nameplate, Thomas Reeve. "Sunrise flavoring," I said. "You signed the papers." "I represent hundreds of clients," he said. "I don't recall specifics." "Try this one," I said, sliding a photo of Clarissa across the desk. "She's dead. I'm trying to make sure she stays the last." That got a flicker, a tightening around the eyes. "Tragic," he murmured. "But I'm bound by confidentiality." "Sure," I said. "But you're also bound by the district attorney if Kramer decides to drop by. And between us, he's not as patient as I am." Reeve exhaled slowly. "You didn't hear this from me. The primary shareholder behind Sunrise isn't Miss Vale or her cousin. It's an entity called Mortgage Partners. They're quiet investors, food distribution, small-scale imports. Operate through intermediaries. If one of their accounts goes bad, it disappears." "Where are they based?" "Nominally Zurich. But their U.S. operations use an address in Midtown, East 68th, above a fragrance importer." When I got back that evening, Wolfe was waiting. He'd already prepared tea, which seemed almost indecent after Kramer's report. I laid it out for him. "Reeve, Mortgage, Zurich." Wolfe nodded once. "Fragrance importer," he repeated. "An elegant disguise. Flavoring, scent, essence, all commerce of the senses. Such trade attracts those who understand profit through subtlety. You think they're behind Clarissa's death?" "I think," he said, "they financed her ambition, used her bakery as a distribution front, and when exposure threatened, severed the connection permanently. The poison was both punctuation and warning." "Warning to who?" "To anyone inclined to speak next." He closed his eyes then, and I let the silence stretch. The orchids glowed faintly under their lights, serene and indifferent. Outside, the city hummed, a rhythm of commerce and corruption too old to surprise either of us. Finally, he said, "Archie, inform Mr. Panzer to watch the premises discreetly for the next week. We may not be the only ones who've tasted too much of this confection." "Expecting visitors?" "Possibly, though I'd prefer they lose their appetite." I left him to his orchids, knowing that whatever calm had returned to the brownstone was temporary. Wolfe had solved the crime, but something darker was still stirring beneath it, something that hadn't yet decided whether it was finished with us. And if there's one thing I've learned about Nero Wolfe, it's that he doesn't let unfinished business linger. He digests it piece by piece until only the truth remains. And sometimes that truth bites back. The next few days passed in the kind of quiet that wasn't peace, only patience. Fritz still cooked, the orchids still got their daily reverence, and Wolfe still sat behind his desk like a philosopher who'd misplaced his faith. But something in the brownstone had shifted, a tension that lived in the corners, humming faintly, like the air before a storm. Wolfe was waiting. For what, he wouldn't say, and I didn't push. When he's in that state, questions are wasted breath. Saul Panzer reported in on the third night. I was at my desk when the call came through, and I could hear the street noise behind him, low and steady, like a pulse. "Archie," he said, "we've got a shadow." "Meaning?" "Meaning someone's been watching your block since yesterday. Same car, same man. Gray sedan, unmarked. He's too neat to be local muscle and too careful to be a tourist. License plate? Fake. I ran it. Belongs to a defunct delivery company. The man's late 30s. Good suit, no tie, no ring. Spends a lot of time pretending not to look interested. I glanced toward the office. Wolfe was pretending not to listen, which meant he was catching every word. "Saul," I said, "keep eyes on him. Don't spook him yet." "Already done," he said. "If he moves, I'll let you know." When I hung up, Wolfe spoke without looking up from his book. "Our financier's watchdog," he said. "You expected him?" "Of course. They'll wish to know how much we know, and whether we are inclined to share it." I frowned. "And are we?" "That depends," he said, closing the book with a soft thump, "upon whether they remain content to watch or attempt to interfere." He didn't elaborate, which was Wolfe's way of saying the discussion was over. But that night, as I double-checked the locks and made a sweep of the street from the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped from pastry theft into something far less edible. The next morning, Fritz found a small envelope on the stoop. No address, no stamp. Just my name, typed. I opened it under Wolfe's eye. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper, embossed faintly with a crest, a coiled serpent around a chalice. The words were short, precise, and expensive. "Mr. Goodwin, your employer's curiosity is becoming inconvenient. End it, or it will be ended for you." No signature. I handed it to Wolfe, who read it once and placed it neatly beside his teacup. "Blunt," he said. "I had hoped for sophistication." "It's a threat," I said. "You don't look impressed." "I'm not impressed by inevitability," he said. "When a man sends a warning, it is because he prefers deterrence to action. Therefore, we have time." "Time for what?" "Breakfast, for one." I sighed. "And after breakfast?" "After breakfast," he said, "we shall use their impatience against them." By noon, Saul had confirmed the sedan was gone. "Our man switched vehicles," he said. "Now he's on foot, east side of the block, pretending to read a newspaper." "Classic," I muttered. "He's either a professional or a bad movie extra." "He's good," Saul said. "Too good. Whoever he works for pays well and expects silence." When I relayed the update, Wolfe nodded slightly. "Archie, bring him in." "You mean invite him for tea?" "Not tea," he said dryly. "Conversation. A professional observer will not resist an opportunity to measure his subject. Provide it." That afternoon I went down the steps, crossed the street, and caught the man's reflection in a shop window. He was pretending to study a magazine rack, the way a fox pretends to nap near the hen house. I stepped beside him. "You can put down the crime novel," I said. "You're about to meet the author." He smiled faintly without looking up. "Mr. Goodwin, I was told you were charming. Flattery's wasted before lunch. Care to take a walk?" He folded the paper and followed, keeping pace easily. Up close, he had the kind of face that doesn't stick in memory. Angular, neat, forgettable. That alone made me nervous. "Who are you with?" I asked. He shrugged. "I represent an interested party." "Mortgage partners?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "You've been busy?" "I get paid for it. Why's your boss sending poison instead of thank-you notes?" He stopped, turned, and met my eye. "Because your employer is digging where it's unwise to dig. Mr. Wolfe's curiosity disturbs delicate arrangements. Some people prefer equilibrium. I've noticed equilibrium usually favors the rich." He smiled again. "That's the nature of balance." "Tell me something," I said. "Was Clarissa Vale's death part of the balance?" His eyes flickered. "Miss Vale made choices. We corrected them. That was all I needed." "You realize that's an admission?" "Of nothing," he said smoothly. "You're free to interpret it as you wish. Just as you're free to stop now." He handed me a card. Blank, except for a faint scent of bergamot. "Consider that courtesy. It won't be extended twice." Then he walked away, disappearing into the blur of pedestrians as if the city swallowed him whole. When I got back, Wolfe was waiting. He listened without interruption, only frowning slightly at the mention of the card. Bergamot, he said. The base note in certain colognes produced by Maison Allery, a fragrance firm with offices above East 68th Street. Mortgage's cover operation. So we're right in their perfume bottle, I said. What's next? Bake sale diplomacy. He ignored me, as usual. This man, he said, was not a thug. He was an emissary, which means his masters are testing our limits. They will escalate, but not crudely. Perhaps through subtle intrusion. You mean sabotage? Of a kind, he said. We will tighten security. Fritz will handle deliveries personally. You will screen all visitors. And if they try again? He smiled faintly. Then we shall return the courtesy. It was 2 nights later when the brownstone was, in fact, trespassed, not by brute force, by stealth. Fritz discovered it first. One of the orchid room windows open a crack, the lock tampered with. Nothing missing, nothing broken. Just air displaced, faintly scented with something floral and foreign. Wolfe stood before the orchids that morning like a priest before violated relics. His face was calm, but his eyes were small and dangerous. This, he said, is an intrusion I will not forgive. Want me to call Kramer? I asked. No, he said. Kramer blunders. This requires precision. He went to his desk, opened a drawer, and drew out the envelope from earlier, the one with the serpent crest. He studied it again, then nodded to himself. Archie, find Saul. Tell him to return to East 68th Street. Watch the fragrance importer. Tonight, if any package leaves the premises, I wish to know its destination. Expecting perfume? Expecting poison, he said softly. By midnight, Saul's call came through again. You were right. 2 men just loaded a crate into a van marked Maison Allery. They're headed downtown toward the docks. Follow them, I said. Keep your distance. He did. An hour later, he reported the van had stopped at a warehouse by Pier 19. No lights inside, but 1 guard out front, armed. I relayed it to Wolfe, who had already begun phoning Kramer. When he finished, he leaned back, a glint in his eye that meant the game was ending soon. The warehouse, he said, contains more than perfume. It will hold records, distribution manifests, shipments of flavoring agents that double as narcotics precursors. Miss Vale's bakery was merely one tributary. Meaning this isn't about cupcakes at all, I said. Of course not, Wolfe replied. The sugar was camouflage. The true trade lies in chemistry and greed. By dawn, Kramer called from the docks, his voice grudgingly respectful. You were right again, Wolfe. We found ledgers, accounts, and enough contraband to fill a courtroom. Mortgage Partners is finished. Wolfe didn't smile. You may enjoy the applause, Inspector. I require only silence. When he hung up, the brownstone was quiet again. Fritz was already in the kitchen, the smell of breakfast creeping back into the air. I poured coffee, and Wolfe accepted his cup with a nod. Another web untangled, I said. But you don't look satisfied. He stirred his cup thoughtfully. Satisfaction, Archie, is for men who eat without reflection. I prefer comprehension. We have merely trimmed 1 vine from a trellis of corruption. Meaning there'll be another. Always. He sipped, then added, but for now, Fritz's eggs will suffice. And with that, the brownstone settled again as it always did, its peace restored, its sanctity intact, its master at ease. But I couldn't help thinking, as I looked out the window at the waking city, that somewhere out there, another ambitious soul was stirring sugar into poison, convinced they'd found a sweeter way to sin. The morning after the warehouse raid, the city exhaled as if it too had been holding its breath. Newspapers ran their usual half-accurate stories. International flavoring syndicate exposed. Cupcake Queen's secret empire collapses. There was even a grainy photo of Kramer, looking like he'd rather swallow a typewriter than smile for the camera. I brought a stack of them into the office and dropped them on Wolfe's desk. He glanced at the headlines, snorted once, and turned the page of his book. "They're giving you credit this time," I said. "Even spelled your name right." "Unfortunate," he murmured. "Publicity attracts the wrong sort of clientele. Idiots seeking adventure, journalists seeking gossip, and law enforcement seeking assistance. None pay adequately." "You might try enjoying the victory for once," I said, pouring myself coffee. "We just helped take down a global racket using cupcakes and perfume as fronts. That's not nothing." He set his book down slowly, like a man closing scripture. "Archie, a racket, global or domestic, is still composed of men, and men, once uprooted, regrow. We have pruned the vine, not burned the seed. Meaning there's more. Meaning," he said, "that men of commerce do not build empires without partners. The ledgers from the warehouse, those Kramer confiscated, will show accounts beyond mortgage partners. One of them, I suspect, will lead somewhere closer than Zurich." I leaned forward. "Closer?" He looked at me. "In this city?" I had my doubts, but I didn't argue. I've learned the hard way that when Wolfe starts hearing echoes, it's only a matter of time before something knocks at the door. It came 2 days later. Fritz was arranging orchids in the front room when the bell rang. I was in the office, pretending to type, which meant doing nothing efficiently. The visitor was a woman, though I couldn't see her right away. Only heard the tone. Low, deliberate, and confident in the way people are when they believe their money can make introductions for them. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, stepping into view. She was in her early 40s, dressed like winter wealth. Grey coat, pearls, gloves that cost more than my rent. "My name is Margaret Hensley. I believe you've recently been involved in a rather delicate investigation concerning one of my business affiliates." Wolfe didn't move an inch, but his eyes narrowed. "Define affiliate, madam." "Mortgage Partners," she said. "You dismantled one of our subsidiaries. An impressive feat, I admit. But unfortunately, it has created certain disruptions. I'd like to discuss restitution." I raised an eyebrow. "You want to pay him off?" She turned to me with a smile that was all sugar and razors. "Mr. Goodwin, isn't it? You misunderstand. I wish to ensure that whatever Mr. Wolfe has learned remains private. Discretion has a value, does it not?" Wolfe let out a sound that could have been a chuckle or a growl. "You presume I would sell silence?" "I presume," she said coolly, "that everyone sells something." He regarded her for a long moment, then said, "Sit down." She did, crossing her legs gracefully. I noticed she kept her gloves on. A small thing, but telling. People who never remove gloves either fear contamination or leave fingerprints elsewhere. "You were aware," Wolfe said, "that Miss Vale's enterprise was used for illegal distribution." "I was aware it was profitable," she said evenly. "My partners managed operations. I handled investment. We believed the product was legitimate. I assure you, had I known otherwise—" "Madam," Wolfe interrupted, "if deceit were currency, your company would control the mint. You financed the scheme and disposed of its liability. You sent the letter to my assistant, and your man delivered the cyanide to Miss Vale's cell." Her composure wavered just slightly, a ripple across polished marble. "I see rumor travels quickly." "Rumor," Wolfe said, "is what the ignorant call evidence when it makes them uncomfortable." She leaned forward. "Then tell me, Mr. Wolfe, what exactly do you intend to do with your evidence?" Wolfe steepled his fingers. "I intend to preserve it. The police have their portion, but I possess what they will not: context. It is the difference between catching a thief and understanding theft." "You're very philosophical," she said. "But philosophy won't stop men like mine from protecting their interests." "And yet," he said calmly, You came here to negotiate rather than threaten. Why? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because I prefer civility, and because I suspect you'd survive the latter. I couldn't help grinning. Smart woman. Wolfe ignored me. Madame, I decline your offer of discretion, but I will extend my own courtesy. Withdraw your remaining operations from this city. Close every account, sell every license, and vanish. If you remain longer than 48 hours, I will speak with Inspector Kramer and provide him the material that implicates you directly. You will not enjoy his conversation. For the first time, she looked unsettled. You'd bring ruin to an entire firm. You've mistaken me for Providence, he said. I bring only consequence. She rose, her jaw tight. You'll regret this, Mr. Wolfe. Doubtful, he said, already returning his attention to the orchids. I rarely regret digestion. She left without another word, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. When the door shut, I exhaled. You think she'll take the hint? She will, he said, but her superiors may not. That prediction proved right sooner than I liked. That night, around 11, Saul called again. Archie, you sitting down? Depends. Bad news? 2 men tried to torch the warehouse on Pier 19. Fire department got there before it spread, but it wasn't random. They were cleaning house. Paperwork, ledgers, samples, all gone. Anyone caught? Both men dead, Saul said grimly. Poisoned before the fire. Same compound as Clarissa Vale. Whoever's behind this isn't sloppy. They're systematic. I repeated it to Wolfe, who was already frowning. A purge, he said. They are erasing links. The woman today was merely the visible portion of a hierarchy. Above her, someone else. You going after them? He looked at me, and I could almost see the thought forming, slow and certain. No. They will come to me. They will assume arrogance is my weakness. It will not occur to them that it is also my weapon. The next evening, while I was sorting the last of the case files, the phone rang again. Fritz answered, then called out softly, Mr. Wolfe, a visitor. It was the man from the street, the one who had warned me days before. The neat face, the calm eyes. This time, no pretense of friendliness. He carried an envelope, thick and sealed. Mr. Wolfe, he said, my employers send this as a final courtesy. Inside you'll find a release form and a bank draft. Sign it, and the matter ends. Decline, and you'll find your peace interrupted permanently. Wolfe regarded him with mild curiosity. You are persistent. Efficient, the man corrected. My employers prefer closure. Wolfe gestured to me. Archie, show our guest out. The man hesitated, perhaps expecting debate, but Wolfe had already returned to his book. I guided him to the door, but just before he stepped out, he turned slightly. You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Goodwin. I hope you're not fond of sleeping lightly. I've been working for Wolfe too long for that, I said. When I returned, Wolfe was still reading. The envelope sat unopened on the desk. You're not even curious what's inside, I asked. He smiled faintly. I already know. The amount will be extravagant, the threat implicit. Both are equally insulting. So what's your move? He closed the book. To wait. When men rely on fear, they eventually grow careless. And when they do, fear changes direction. He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Archie, remind me to call Kramer tomorrow. He'll want to know that the ashes at Pier 19 conceal more than evidence. They conceal vanity, and vanity, when cornered, tends to speak. That night, as I checked the locks one last time, I saw the faint glint of headlights outside, then darkness again. Somewhere in that quiet street another car was waiting, another pair of eyes watching. I almost smiled. If they thought they could outwait Nero Wolfe, they hadn't done their homework. Wolfe doesn't chase his enemies. He lets them ripen. And when the time comes, he plucks them with surgical precision. In that room, the orchids breathed their clean, slow perfume. Outside, the city schemed. And in between, Wolfe sat, immovable, unbothered, and already 2 steps ahead of the next move none of us had seen yet. The next morning started as if nothing had happened, which was the most deceptive thing about it. The orchids were getting their morning mist, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and Wolfe was already buried behind a newspaper, pretending not to read about the consequences of his own handiwork. But the air in the brownstone carried a charge, one I'd learned to recognize from years of proximity. When Wolfe went still for too long, it meant he was listening to the world breathing in the wrong rhythm. He folded the paper with deliberate care and said, "Archie, who was watching the street last night?" I was halfway through my toast. No one I recognized. Same sedan, same shadows. I think our friends are back to sightseeing. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Sightseeing implies curiosity. These men are not curious. They are confirming something, likely that we remain alive. Not exactly comforting, I said. So what's the move? You've already declined their offer, which means they'll either sweeten the deal or sour it. Indeed, he said, pouring another cup of coffee. I anticipate the latter, but they underestimate inconvenience. I'm not easily displaced. True, I said. They'd need a crane. He ignored that, as usual. We must ascertain who among the Morlidge remnants has the authority to act. The emissary you met, describe him again. Neat, early 40s, neutral face, the kind of guy who could sit in a waiting room for 6 hours and still look composed. Which suggests discipline, Wolfe said. Military or intelligence background. Private firm, perhaps. He paused, drumming a finger against the porcelain. Archie, call Saul. Ask him to identify any registered security contractors tied to Morlidge Partners or Maison Alaire. We will begin there. I made the call. Saul didn't waste words. He never does. Give me 2 hours, he said, and hung up. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. Archie, until this resolves, Fritz is not to open the door to any deliverymen, policemen or charitable societies. You will handle all entries. I prefer intruders to come through the front, where I can observe their manners. Noted, I said, and if they come through the window again? Then Fritz may shoot them, Wolfe said simply. By mid-afternoon, Saul called back. Got something, he said. A private outfit called Syntrex Global. Registered in Maïs, Delaware, naturally. Operates under contract for several international clients. Security, transport, risk mitigation. The board has 4 names, but the real controlling partner is a man named Victor Lannon. I repeated it to Wolfe. He didn't blink. Lannon, he murmured. An ex-intelligence officer, dismissed for unauthorized operations. Yes, a man accustomed to cleaning his own mess. Meaning he's the one sending watchers and envelopes? Meaning, Wolfe said, he considers himself the hand that erases. Such men have an aversion to unfinished business. It was dusk when the unfinished business arrived. The doorbell rang once. Firm, polite, confident. Fritz froze halfway to the kitchen. I signaled him to stay back and open the door just wide enough to see the man standing there, tall, lean, overcoat buttoned, eyes grey as slate. Victor Lannon. Mr. Goodwin, he said, voice low and even. I believe your employer is expecting me. Expecting you, I said, isn't the same as welcoming you. He smiled faintly. I'll risk it. I stepped aside. He walked in like a man who owned his shadow. Wolfe was waiting in his chair, hands folded, gaze calm but sharp. Lannon stopped a few feet away, neither bowing nor challenging. The room went so quiet, the clock seemed to hesitate. Mr. Lannon, Wolfe said, you've been industrious. Lannon nodded once. Efficiency saves lives. And time. Whose lives? Everyone's, Lannon said, including yours. I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Wolfe. I'm here to end the inconvenience. By bribery, intimidation, or diplomacy? By understanding, he said. You exposed a front operation that should have remained invisible. That damage is done. But if you pursue further connections, if you continue digging, you'll endanger interests far beyond New York commerce. Wolfe's lips tightened. I do not respond to veiled mysticism. Specify. Let's just say, Lannon replied, that Mortgage Partners wasn't only laundering profits. They were funding a series of logistical channels used by multiple agencies. Legitimate ones. The flavoring and fragrance trade made a convenient mask. Your exposure jeopardized more than criminals. It embarrassed institutions that prefer the dark. Ah, Wolfe said softly. So the rot is patriotic. I'm offering you a choice, Lannon continued. Let this die quietly. We'll ensure no one disturbs you again, or persist, and the consequences won't be financial. Wolfe looked at him for a long, slow moment, then said, Mr. Lannon, you are a man of method, yet your logic fails in one essential regard. You presume that I fear consequence. I do not. I fear ignorance. Lannon's eyes hardened slightly. Then you're braver than you look. Or simply better fed, Wolfe said. I almost smiled. But Lannon didn't. He reached into his coat, not fast enough to be, threatening, and placed a sealed folder on Wolfe's desk. This contains what you shouldn't know. Read it, and you'll understand why this must stop. After that, destroy it. Wolfe didn't touch it. If I refuse, Lannon straightened. Then we both lose. Good evening? He left as quietly as he'd come, leaving the scent of rain and risk behind him. When the door closed, Wolfe stared at the folder for nearly a full minute before finally saying, Archie, open it. I did. Inside were several documents, bank statements, coded memos, and a single typed summary sheet. It outlined transactions linking Mortgage to multiple shell companies, one of which bore the initials of a U.S. agency Wolfe had mocked more than once in conversation. If genuine, it meant this wasn't just crime. It was sanctioned complicity. Wolfe's eyes moved over the page, unblinking. When he finished, he leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and said, Now they've made an error. By showing their hand, I asked. By assuming I would fold, he said. We now possess leverage, not knowledge. And leverage, unlike knowledge, can be exchanged. He picked up the phone and dialed Kramer's private number. The conversation was short and unsentimental. When he hung up, I asked, You really think Kramer can touch this? Kramer cannot, Wolfe said. But his superiors can. They will treat it as an internal embarrassment to be buried. And in the process, they will bury Lannon's protection. He will be disavowed. Which leaves him where? Vulnerable, Wolfe said, and desperate men make revealing moves. That night, the brownstone stayed lit long after midnight. Wolfe dictated notes, compiled copies, sealed envelopes. Fritz moved quietly in the background, pretending not to notice the hum of urgency that had replaced routine. Around 2 a.m, Wolfe stopped abruptly and said, Archie, I believe I shall require the use of your pistol. That wasn't something he said lightly. I got it from the drawer and placed it on his desk. Expecting trouble? Expecting, he said. Resolution. It came sooner than either of us planned. At 3:15, a noise broke the quiet. A soft click from the kitchen, followed by a whisper of footsteps. Wolfe didn't move, but his eyes opened like shutters in a storm. I went toward the sound, pistol ready, and caught a glimpse of movement by the rear door. A man, crouched, reaching for something near the hinges. Hold it, I said. He froze, then turned slowly. It was Lannon. His expression was calm, but the gun in his hand wasn't decorative. Mr. Goodwin, he said quietly, step aside. You don't understand what's at stake. Oh, I understand fine, I said. You're cleaning house again. Before he could answer, Wolfe's voice rolled through the dark like thunder. "Mr. Lennon, your efficiency is admirable, but you overreach. The police are outside." It wasn't a bluff. Through the kitchen window, red and blue lights flickered, sirens muted, but nah. Lannon's jaw tightened. For the first time, his mask cracked. "You set me up," he said. Wolfe's tone was almost gentle. "You set yourself up, sir. You believed discretion was stronger than conscience. It rarely is." Lannon hesitated, then lowered his weapon, very slowly. "You've just made powerful enemies, Wolfe." "I've had them before," Wolfe said. "They bore me." Kramer entered moments later, gun drawn, face grim. He took one look at Lannon and muttered something I won't repeat, then cuffed him himself. By dawn, the brownstone was quiet again, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and Wolfe's steady breathing. He sat, eyes closed, the faintest curve of satisfaction on his mouth. "It's over?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing is ever over, Archie. Men like Lannon are symptoms, not diseases. The world breeds replacements." "Then why bother?" He opened his eyes, meeting mine. "Because, my dear Archie, even a single act of clarity in a fog of deceit is worth the exertion. And occasionally," he added, glancing toward the kitchen, "it earns a satisfactory breakfast." He reached for his cup, and I found myself almost smiling. Outside, dawn was breaking across the city, sharp, gray, unrepentant. Inside, Nero Wolfe resumed his silence, the great engine of his mind settling back into its familiar, terrible calm. And that's how the case ended. Not with applause or champagne, but with coffee, exhaustion, and a faint reminder that justice, like flavor, is never absolute. It's only balanced, for a while. By the time the sun crawled over the rooftops, the brownstone was steeped in the kind of silence that only follows a night too full of noise. Fritz moved around the kitchen like a ghost, polishing silver that didn't need polishing. Kramer had left just before dawn, hauling Lannon away in a car that looked too small to contain his kind of arrogance. The last thing he'd said, half growled at Wolfe, was, "You'd better hope Washington doesn't call me about this." Wolfe's answer, "They already will," hadn't improved the mood. Now, hours later, the city outside had resumed its hum, and Wolfe, in his armchair, was the picture of repose. To the untrained eye, he looked asleep, chin resting slightly toward his chest, hands folded like marble. But I've seen that posture before. It's what passes for a volcano in Wolfe's geography, still massive and holding heat under the crust. I tried breaking the silence with a little gentle needling. "If you're planning to sleep off the last 48 hours, I'd like to claim hazard pay." He didn't open his eyes. "You're compensated adequately." "Sure, but not for assassination attempts before breakfast." His mouth twitched. Lannon was not an assassin. He was an errand. The difference is substantial. "Big difference to me. One gets you dead faster." That got a proper grunt, which I took as an invitation. "You think he'll talk?" "He'll try not to, but his employers will require an explanation. He cannot give them one without incriminating himself. That is the nature of circular guilt. It devours its center." "Meaning the bigger fish are still swimming?" "Yes," he said, opening his eyes at last, "and they are too far from the net to be caught by law. But law, fortunately, is not the only instrument of consequence." I raised an eyebrow. "You planning vigilante work now?" "Pooh, I plan understanding. It is more efficient." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He stood, a rare act of bodily commitment for him, and walked to the window. The morning light cut across his face, pale and uncompromising. "Archie, you have an appointment this afternoon." "I do?" "Yes, at the offices of a Mr. Harlan Peaver, Deputy Director of Commerce Liaison. He will receive you at 3 o'clock. Tell him you represent Nero Wolfe and that you wish to discuss the matter of Syntrex Global." I frowned. Government liaison. Sounds like trouble. It is, he said, but trouble, properly managed, produces results. He turned back toward his chair, signaling the end of instruction. Be cordial, but not cooperative. You will learn more from what he refuses to say. I went. The Commerce Building downtown was the kind of place designed to look important but smell of paper and air conditioning. Peaver was waiting in his office, a tall man with gray hair and a handshake that could have been carved from etiquette. He smiled like a man who's mastered the art of polite hostility. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I've heard of you. Mr. Wolfe's interpreter, shall we say?" "That's one way to put it," I said. "He asked me to speak with you about Syntrex Global." The smile thinned. "An unfortunate misunderstanding, that. The company has been dissolved." "Fast work," I said. "Considering its managing partner was arrested only last night." Peaver's fingers tightened on his pen. "We were aware of Mr. Lannon's activities. His termination was already in progress." "Convenient timing," I said. He looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Goodwin, this matter is of no further relevance to your employer. Syntrex's functions were part of a classified logistics program, one now discontinued. I trust that ends your curiosity." "Not quite," I said. "You see, people keep dying around this logistics program. Clarissa Vale, her fiancé, 2 warehouse men, and now possibly more. My employer finds patterns where others prefer excuses." Peaver's jaw shifted slightly. "Your employer should learn the value of discretion." "Funny," I said. "People keep telling him that, and yet he stays alive." His pen snapped in his hand. It wasn't dramatic, just a clean, brittle break, the kind that reveals too much tension beneath the polish. "Tell Mr. Wolfe," he said, "that certain matters cannot be reopened without consequence to national interests." "I'll tell him," I said, "but I doubt he'll lose sleep." "He doesn't lose sleep over nations, only meals." Peaver's eyes went cold. "Then perhaps he should be reminded that even the most brilliant men can choke on what they bite off." That was my cue to leave. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was exactly where I expected him, behind his desk, staring at a map of Manhattan he'd pinned open beside his globe. Fritz brought me coffee, and I gave Wolfe the play-by-play. He didn't interrupt, but the corner of his mouth twitched once when I mentioned the pen. "Fascinating," he murmured when I finished. "Peaver is precisely the sort of bureaucrat who believes himself both indispensable and invisible. That combination breeds recklessness." "You mean he's behind Mortgage?" "He is one link removed. The type of man used to launder both guilt and money through plausible deniability. Lannon executed his orders, and Miss Vale served as unwitting cover. Now, with both silenced, he considers himself safe." "And he's not?" Wolfe's gaze settled on me like a chess master contemplating his final move. "No one who believes they control chaos is ever safe." He leaned forward. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit the Courier's ledger office. Business column. Speak to a Mr. Dennis Truitt. Give him only this: that Harlan Peaver, deputy director, has been tied to the Mortgage accounts now under federal review. That is all. You're leaking it to the press." "I am not leaking," he said. "I am watering." I grinned. "And you expect it to grow?" "It will flourish. And in flourishing it will expose what sunlight always does." He didn't need to say more. By morning, the story was out. The Courier's ledger ran a front-page piece under the headline, "Government Ties to International Shell Network Under Review." They didn't name Wolfe, but Kramer called before breakfast anyway, yelling something about provocation and political suicide. Wolfe listened patiently, said, "Yes, Inspector," and hung up halfway through the 3rd threat. By noon, Peaver resigned, officially for health reasons. Unofficially because someone in Washington had yanked his rug out from under him before the flames reached the curtains. The papers praised swift government action, the sort of irony Wolfe savored like well-aged cheese. But the best part came later that evening. Saul stopped by, holding a small envelope. "Delivered by hand," he said. "No return address." Inside was a note, typed neatly. "Mr. Wolfe, your point has been made. Syntrex is finished. You will be left in peace. Our compliments on your restraint." It was unsigned, but it didn't have to be. The typewriter ribbon matched the one Lannon's men had used for their threats. Wolfe read it twice, then burned it over the ashtray. "Predictable," he said. "They are incapable of apology, so they imitate civility." "So that's it?" I asked. "We're done?" He took a long breath, gazing at the fire curling the paper's edge. "Done, yes, but not concluded. Men like that never vanish. They change stationery." I leaned back. "You ever think about retiring? Growing orchids full-time, letting the world rot on its own?" He looked up at me, one eyebrow rising like a question mark carved from stone. "Archie, if the world rotted unattended, who would provide the fertilizer?" That was Nero Wolfe for you. Comfortably cynical, immovably moral in his own peculiar way. Outside, the city glowed under its evening haze, oblivious to how close it had come to swallowing another layer of its own corruption. Inside, the brownstone was steady again, warm, ordered, full of the smell of Fritz's dinner and the quiet hum of Wolfe's victory. For most people, justice comes with a gavel or a gun. For Wolfe, it came with logic and a glass of beer to wash it down. And as I closed the office blinds, watching the city disappear behind them, I couldn't help thinking that somewhere out there, another storm was already brewing. But for tonight, at least, Nero Wolfe had beaten the odds again. He lifted his glass, the faintest glint in his eye. "Archie," he said, "it appears the frosting at last has settled." And for once, I didn't argue. The rain came back that night, slow and deliberate, like the city was rinsing itself of guilt. It tapped the window in soft rhythm while the orchids glistened under their lamps, untouched by anything as vulgar as weather. Wolfe had just finished his beer, his second, which in his world meant he was indulging in optimism, and Fritz had retired to the kitchen to prepare what promised to be a complicated midnight soufflé. I was at my desk, sorting through the last of the files. Not because Wolfe had asked me to, but because after weeks of deception, betrayal, and bureaucrats with poison in their pockets, it felt wrong to just stop. "You're restless," Wolfe said finally, not looking up from the page he was pretending to read. "I call it alive," I said. "Feels strange after all that excitement." "Excitement," he said, "is the province of the young and the ineffectual. It serves no practical purpose." "Except keeping us employed," I said. He made a small sound, something between a sigh and a grunt. "Employment, yes. Sustenance of the mind, occasionally. But excitement, never." I leaned back. "You know, for a man who says he hates turmoil, you collect it like a hobby." "I do not collect turmoil," he said evenly. "I allow it to find me when it has exhausted all lesser intellects." That was Wolfe in full bloom, half insult, half truth. But I let it go. The silence, stretched, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock and the faint hiss of rain. Then he said, very softly, "Archie, do you recall what Miss Vale said when she first entered this room?" I thought about it. That someone was trying to ruin her through her cupcakes. "Precisely. She framed her distress as commerce, not conscience. The first clue." "And the last?" He looked at me, the faintest glint in his eyes. "The last was her death, the final act of self-interest disguised as victimhood. But beyond her, there was something larger, an architecture of ambition so meticulously assembled that even its collapse was designed to conceal the architect." "You're talking about Peever," I said. He nodded once. "Peever will survive the inquiry. He will claim ignorance, and others will accept it because it is convenient. But he has learned something invaluable, that even the smallest enterprise, when built on deceit, can topple empires. That lesson, I suspect, will wound him more than prosecution ever could. And what about Lannon? Lannon will vanish. The government cannot afford to try him publicly, so he will be quietly reassigned to oblivion. The bureaucracy feeds on silence, and silence is its most faithful servant. I frowned. So after all that, the worst of them walk. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the rain outside. Walk, yes, but they do so over thin ice. Their lives will be a constant rehearsal of fear, waiting for a knock that may never come. That is punishment enough for men who value control above conscience. I let that sink in. He wasn't wrong. For all his disdain of drama, Wolfe had a sense of justice that ran deeper than any court could deliver. After a while, Fritz came in with a tray, soufflé steaming, delicate as pride, and set it down. Wolfe thanked him with a nod, then turned to me. Archie, you will archive the case notes under V. V for veil? For vanity, he said. I smiled. You know, that might be the best label you've ever used. He took a spoonful of the soufflé, closed his eyes briefly and murmured, an acceptable dessert. Redemption through texture. Meaning? Meaning, Archie, that life's tragedies, like this confection, are tolerable only when properly risen. Collapse, however inevitable, is still a failure of craft. That was as close as he ever came to sentiment. He finished his soufflé, set down the spoon, and leaned back in his chair, looking entirely at peace. Outside, the rain kept falling, but softer now, more like memory than penance. The city would wake in the morning none the wiser, and the newspapers would find new scandals to chew on. The names of Clarissa Vale, Victor Lannon, and Harlan Peaver would fade into footnotes, and somewhere in a quiet corner of power, another scheme would already be brewing. But for now, the brownstone was whole again. Sir, the storm had passed, the orchids gleamed, and Nero, Wolfe, immovable, impossible, irreplaceable, had once more restored order to a world that didn't deserve it. He opened his eyes and looked at me. Archie, he said, tell Fritz the soufflé was sufficient, and then close the windows. The rain offends me. Yes, sir, I said, and did as I was told. The latch clicked shut, sealing us off from the city and its endless noise. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of coffee and quiet victory. And that was that. Another case closed. Another fool's game played out and checkmated. Somewhere between Wolfe's logic and my legwork, justice had once again found its footing, not perfect, not permanent, but precise enough for the moment. As I switched off the light, I thought about what he'd said, about vanity, ambition, and collapse. Then I smiled to myself, because whatever else the world might get wrong, Wolfe would always be right about one thing. Some appetites never change. And neither, thank heaven, did Nero Wolfe. 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 Did Nero Wolfe.